I don't think I knew before. I remember reading the footnote that attempted to inform the court of potential bias.
No, actually, the Inspector General found on page 139 of the report, and I quote, on October 12, 2016, Evans' concerns about Steele were briefed to Comey, end quote. And yet you signed off knowing that the research was funded by the Democratic Party, knowing that senior officials in the Department of Justice National Security Division had serious concerns. You signed off. Nonetheless, let's talk about what else you knew or didn't know. When you certified that FISA application, did you know the allegations in the Steele dossier came from subsources, not from Steele's own knowledge?
I believe I did know. He had a network of sources and subsources, correct.
Did you know who this primary subsource was?
No.
Did you ask who the primary subsource was?
No.
Did you ask the FBI to take any steps to identify that source before submitting this application to the FISA court?
I don't know whether I asked. I knew there was an effort underway to try to replicate Steele's source network so we could figure out what to make of Steele's reporting.
Well, what the Inspector General concluded was that Comey told us, this is page 153, that the application seemed factually and legally sufficient when he read it, and he had no questions or concerns before he signed it. Surely you realize that the source's identity and his motives, this subsource, who we now know may well have been a Russian agent, that would affect his credibility, correct?
I thought it was important that we were informing the court of any potential bias from any source. And I remember reading language in that initial filing that addressed that potential bias issue with respect to the Steele reporting.
So your testimony now is that you informed the court of potential problems with the subsource, political motivations, connections to foreign governments. The FISA court was informed about that?
No, I'm sorry. I understood your question to be about whether we informed the court about potential bias in Steele's reporting. I didn't know the identity or any information about subsources.
So you personally authorized an unprecedented surveillance on an individual associated with the presidential campaign during that campaign's ongoing time period, October of 2016. You signed off personally on 2 further applications based on information from a source that you believed, correctly, worked for the Democratic Party, and the source's information, it turns out, was coming from a suspected Russian agent, yet you did nothing to try to verify any of this information. You brushed aside the concerns of high-level national security lawyers at the Department of Justice. How are the American people to trust you or the FBI following abuses like this?
I disagree extensively with your predicate. I think the FBI is an organization that is honest, competent, independent, and also flawed because it's made up of human beings.
Well, I have to say, I'm not necessarily worried about the FBI as a whole. I'm worried about you, and I'm worried about what you certified to a court that led the FISA court to conclude that it had been misled repeatedly, and that due to the nature of those repeated misrepresentations, it could no longer trust what the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the agency you led, what it said in subsequent cases. That, I suggest to you, is an incredible dereliction of duty, indeed a betrayal of your responsibility as director of the FBI. If I could, Mr. Chairman, just one last thing I want to follow up on. The letter from to Chairman Graham from John Ratcliffe, which I know you've seen, Mr. Comey, as you mentioned it earlier. Mr. Ratcliffe says, on 7 September 2016, U.S. intelligence officials forwarded an investigative referral to FBI Director James Comey regarding U.S. presidential candidate Hillary Clinton's approval of a plan concerning Donald Trump and Russian hackers as a means of distracting the public from her use of a private mail server, end quote. Did you open an investigation?
I don't know what that refers to. As I said earlier, that does not ring any bells with me when I read that.
You did not receive any investigative referral of this nature?
I don't remember it. I don't remember receiving anything that's described in that letter.
Okay. I have to say, Mr. Chairman, I realize my time has expired. I find it extraordinary that a referral from the IC to the FBI regarding Hillary Clinton's campaign and potential illicit activity received no attention from the FBI. So little attention, the director doesn't even recall it, and yet the director and others had plenty of time to go and seek surveillance warrants during an ongoing presidential campaign warrants so flawed that the FISA court has now said it can't trust what the FBI says in future cases. This is an extraordinary abuse of power, and it's time we held people responsible for it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.